All right, hi there, Mr. Sapora here, Marine Biology lecture notes. Today we're going to be talking about marine vertebrates, things with backbones. And before I jump into that, just a few of the nuts and bolts things here. The weekly questions I have up and will post with this video. It's question set 3 for us, and there are no pages from the textbook for this weekly question set. So all of the things you need are from the lecture notes and from the lecture I'm about to give. And then there's a few additional questions. Those things that have the stars, it's here in yellow, such as notochord, looking at lampreys. Yes, just those. You have to go to the links embedded here, and I'll post the links on the class website as well, which I need to update. And then for the lamprey, you'll click here. There's an article. It's a short PDF. I believe it's from, yes, Fish and Wildlife Service about the natural history of our Pacific lampreys. And so some good information there about a local species as well. So have a look there. And if you're looking at these two articles, notochord and vertebral column, if you're not able to make sense of that information, shoot me an email. Let me know. Also, go further, Google it on your own, try to understand how they are similar and how they're different. There's a really like Venn diagram. Vertebral columns evolved from notochords, and in a sense, we still have a notochord even though we have a vertebral column. So they're kind of same, but different. One's really primitive and one's more advanced. How are they similar? How are they different? That's kind of what I want you to look at there in that question. I'll post all this on the Google Classroom this week, and let's just get going. I'll probably break this into two videos, two short videos, two sections. So let's just jump right in. This week we're going to talk about vertebrates, things with backbones. As we go through the species list in this class, we're really looking at different animal phylums. And what I mean by that are you could break life into different classifications, right? So all living things are made of cells. From that, we've discerned that there's two different main cell types. There's a prokaryote and there's a eukaryote, right? So those are the two domains of life. Below domains, we have what we call kingdoms of life, okay? And this is evolving and changing over time, our classification system, as we discover new things and understand more things. But the idea that there's these kind of overarching groups that we can put things into, that's been around since biology started. With Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s. So the idea of kingdoms, there are 6 basic kingdoms that we break life into. Those are, of course, the animal kingdom, which is what we're going to be talking about here. Then there's the plant kingdom. There's the fungus kingdom, fungi. And then there's the smaller things, right? There's protista, which actually includes things like marine algae. There is, then there's bacteria and archaea. Those two are prokaryotes, single-celled. Tiny things. The animal kingdom is the kingdom that we tend to think about. We have some bias in that regard as well, which we'll talk about today. But the animal kingdom is the kingdom that we belong to, so we tend to think about it. And underneath kingdom, there's another layer called phylum. And I put a table on the weekly questions here. You don't have to do anything with it, but I think it does kind of help you understand the classification system. And we're going to jump in a little deeper today with some of this. So this is kind of a reference point if you have a look at it. I put up here different examples. I put up here 3 different marine vertebrate examples, a lamprey, a skate, which is similar to a shark or a stingray, and then a black rockfish, which is a bony fish. Okay, these are all vertebrates. They all belong to things with backbones right here, vertebrata, right? All 3 of these do. They're all animals. And they're all eukaryotes. So in that way, lampreys, skates, and rockfish are similar. Where they differ is at the class level. We get down into class, and then they start to branch off and become different. So they're all chordates, but then they belong to different classes. Now, if we went over to another animal, a cnidarian, right, this jellyfish, Aurelia labiata, it's on our species list. Now, we're similar because they too belong to the animal kingdom, and they too are a eukaryote in that domain. But then below animal, they go off into their own separate phylum. So this classification is sort of like a hierarchical tree. It goes from small to infinitely big below, where every single species exists. And that's where we get down to the bottom layer, genus and species. And this is where we give things their scientific names. Above the genus is the family, then the order, the class, the phylum, the kingdom, and then finally the domain, and then above domain would just be one category, life. Okay. So jumping into this, into the phylum Chordata is where we're going to be looking at, or vertebrata. We're going to be looking at vertebrates. And we're really going to be doing that for the rest of the course, the time that we have this course here. So we're going to be looking first at today at Agnatha and Chondrichthyes, which would be lampreys, sharks, and rays. We'll look at bony fish, and then we'll jump into other groups of chordates as well, birds, and then finally mammals, which we belong to as well, class Mammalia, which we don't have on here. Okay, so if we look at life as classification, these are the different phylums of animals, the different groups, and they're grouped based on similarities that they have and also in order of evolution, right? When did they first evolve? So the oldest animals we find are the simplest ones. They're the sponges, porifera, and then the jellyfish and corals, anemones, and those are all cnidarians. Radial symmetry, really simple cell systems, no complex nerves. We get into flatworms, we have similarities with cnidarians. They have no circulatory system, they have one single opening, but they have primitive eye spots, and they have bilateral symmetry, meaning they have a right and a left. You can see this little squirrel here, and a top and a bottom. Radial symmetry, you don't have a right and a left on a wheel. You have a top and a bottom maybe, right? Or an inside and an outside, but you don't have this more complex symmetry. And so radial symmetry is something that evolves later with bilateral symmetry here. There are actually several different groups of worms, and then we get into mollusks. We'll talk about those later in the species list, and then arthropods, insects, and spiders. Echinoderms and starfish, and then vertebrates and chordates. Interestingly enough, vertebrates and chordates are most closely related to starfish, echinoderms. And if we look at the geologic time scale here, I put a link to it on the slideshow. You can jump into it further if you want to. Going back in time, right, we see all these other groups really kicking off cnidarians and porifera about 850 million years ago. And then we see some of the earlier types of organisms, worms and mollusks, and then of course arthropods and crustaceans. But the first vertebrates, the first chordates, don't show up till about 550 million years ago. Pretty new when we think about the history of life being 3.8 billion years old here on Earth. Most of the time the life has been here on Earth has been single-celled and funky, small, and not incredibly complex. Did I mention funky? Okay. What we're going to focus on, let me refresh this. What we're going to be focusing on then are the chordates here. Well, I added an animation, you just got to see it. Boop, those guys right there. And again, fun fact, when we think about animals, we tend to think, right, if I asked you to think of an animal, you would probably go, boop, right here, chordates. Fun fact, they're only about 4% of all animals. Meaning when you think of animal, you think of a real minority as being the majority. 96% of all animals are all these other groups here on Earth. Only 4% of animals have backbones. But on land, where we live, a lot of the big animals we see have backbones. You don't need a backbone. You don't need a skeletal system if you're really in the water. A lot of things don't. It's bulky. Now it helps if you get bigger, and as things got bigger, things develop these other systems, but for tiny things, they don't need them. And if you're floating in water, why bother anyway? So about 96% of all animals do not have a backbone, and 80% of all animals actually belong to this group, Arthropoda. They're crustaceans, insects, spiders, centipedes. That's what the majority of life is on Earth. It's gross. Just saying. Boom. All right. We're going to jump into the phylum Vertebrata. What is it that makes a vertebrate a vertebrate? In biology, when we talk about groups, in order to be in a group, you have to have certain characteristics that put you in that group. So what are the characteristics that make a vertebrate a vertebrate? Characteristic number one, you have a vertebrate. It's a vertebral column. So you have this backbone, this spine, of some type. Now, as we're going to talk about later, hagfish and lampreys, let me back up here, they don't have vertebrae. They have a notochord, which is similar and puts you into it. It's a piece of cartilage that's the prototype. Vertebrates have specialized sensory organs, eyes, ears, nerves for touch, sound, other things as well. Vertebrates have a brain consisting of concentrated nerves at the anterior end of the nerve cord. That's your head. Anterior. Posterior is posterior. So anterior is the brain, basically, and so brain varies in complexity. If you look at the brains of vertebrates, and vertebrates include things not only like fish and sharks and lampreys, but also birds, amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. They increase in complexity, but the structure is the same blueprint from the start, right? So you start off with these multi-little lobes that all do different things in a fish. In a toad, these lobes fuse in an amphibian. And you still have the same lobage, though, right? The same parts with the same nerves, all put together the same way because it all derives from the same, original sort of form. And then snakes, it gets even more joined together and fused, and then in pigeons, and finally in mammals, an incredibly complex brain that includes folds and wrinkles to increase surface area to increase neuron density. So some type of a brain, right? Maybe not as awesome as mine. But, Okay, vertebrates have skeletal muscles segmented into blocks. So, different groups of muscles. And again, they can attach to the skeletal system, and that allows them to kind of anchor and work independently, and things like that. Respire through gills or lungs. Okay, so they take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide through a system that is then wired into another system called the circulatory system. So this is a system that consists of closed loops. You have a multi-chambered heart, you have arteries, capillaries, and then you have veins. Arteries carry blood from the heart to the tissue. Capillaries disperse the blood, and within that blood is oxygen and nutrients to the tissue, and they pick up waste. So they drop off the good stuff, they pick up the bad stuff, and the veins carry the blood back through things like kidneys, through other organs to filter it out, and then ultimately back to the lungs to then get rid of that carbon dioxide. Then it goes back in the heart and continues on its cycle again and again and again. Things like livers and stuff can actually add new blood, break down old blood cells, and kind of keep the blood clean as well. Kidneys, livers, those types of things clean out blood. Okay. Blood contains hemoglobin protein, so a specialized protein in red blood cells that transports oxygen. Hemoglobin has a hemi. That term is Latin for iron, and that is because it contains iron in the molecule itself. Most of us are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen-based organisms, but then iron is important in hemoglobin. It creates a charge that then attracts oxygen and carbon dioxide to it, and so it's used to transport that around in the blood in that circulatory system. And fun fact, there are 7 classes of vertebrates that currently exist. We're going to cover 2 today. The other ones are going to be, so we're going to cover the lampreys, sharks, and rays. And then there's the bony fish. So now we got 3. Amphibians then come from fish. But these are things that live on land, even though they have fish-like eggs and fish-like brains and fish-like everything else. Even many of them have gills when they're young, like tadpoles or juvenile salamanders. Then from that, reptiles, like a modified amphibian with scales, but now they have hard eggs, don't have gills. From reptiles, you get birds, and then lastly, the 7th group, mammals. Hey, how's it going, mammal? Us. Okay. Boom, vertebrates. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, here's the groups. Yeah, should have been had them up here. Okay, a non-vertebrate group is these weird little tunicates. They're out in the ocean. But then you get the jawless fishes, agnathans, sharks, rays, bony fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And birds are an offshoot of reptiles. They're dinosaurs. Let's talk about our different groups of vertebrates. And for that, I am going to have a new video. So go ahead and close this out. That's kind of my introduction, kind of long, but it's me. And then we'll have one more video where I'll cover rays, skates, and sharks. Peace.